Earlier tonight, police announced Lothar Schaefer had been arrested, but at this hour, they say they're still trying to confirm that. Police say Lothar Schaefer was wanted for purchasing a .45 caliber high-point carbine rifle for his son Conrad in June.
Teenagers are well known for their acts of rebellion, love of adventure, and zeal for life. But what happens when that limitless energy turns dark? Their stories captivate and horrify, from twisted tales of youthful misbehavior to the bone-chilling depths of their atrocities. Here are the 10 most dangerous kids currently rotting on death row. Number 1. Austin Gregory Myers. Austin Gregory Myers and Timothy E. Mosley were responsible for taking the life of an 18-year-old, Justin Michael, in Waynesville, Warren County, Ohio, on January 28, 2014. The differences in the punishment of these two juvenile criminals drew worldwide attention to the occurrence. Their intention was to take a safe from Justin's family house. Justin and Myers had gone to the same middle school and had been childhood friends. Myers and Mosley devised a scheme in which Myers would engage Justin in conversation while Mosley carried out the attack. Myers made contact by knocking on Justin's door, and once admitted, they conversed. When Justin walked to the kitchen, the two thugs turned on him and brutally assaulted him. Justin tragically passed away during this incident. Following the horrible crime, the culprits sought the safe, which they found in a closet. They then attempted to hide their tracks by cleaning up the mess before breaking inside the house. The stolen things were placed into Mosley's vehicle, and they drove away from the scene. During the subsequent legal processes, Mosley, who handled the knife that took the life of Justin, received a life sentence without the possibility of release. In contrast, Austin Myers was condemned to death, highlighting the stark difference in the repercussions they faced. Austin became the state's youngest death row inmate as a result of this ruling. Austin Myers expressed shock and surprise in the aftermath of his capital sentence. He asked the judge to overturn the lethal punishment in his plea. While his comments had a remorseful undertone, his manner remained cold and emotionless. This case exemplifies the difficulties and disparities that can arise in the judicial system, particularly when dealing with juvenile offenders. The terrible demise of Justin Michael emphasizes the devastating consequences of such mindless acts of violence. The disparities in Myers and Mosley's sentences raise concerns about the justice and consistency of the judicial system, spurring a larger discussion concerning the treatment and sentencing of those involved in horrendous crimes. Number 2. Manuela Vittoria. A teenage tourist is facing the death penalty after being convicted of attempting to bring narcotics into Bali, prompting new cautions for Australian visitors. Manuela Vittoria de Araújo Farias, who is 19 years old from Brazil, was allegedly found carrying 3 kilos of prohibited drugs in her suitcase upon her arrival on the Indonesian island in 2023. Farias may face execution by Bali's firing squad if convicted under Indonesia's strict anti-drug laws. This tragedy serves as a fresh warning to Australians planning a trip to Bali. According to her lawyer's remarks, Farias believes she was duped into participating with a gang. She added that her travel to Bali was inspired by a desire to see temples famed for their healing prayers. Farias's mother had recently had a stroke, and she hoped that seeking Buddhist prayers on the island might aid her mother's recovery. According to the Bali Times, Brazilian authorities have refused to disclose the investigation into the accused criminals who supplied Farias with the narcotics. The event emphasizes the seriousness of drug-related charges in Indonesia. The country's laws include the death sentence for a variety of offenses, including drug smuggling. The Australian government's Smart Traveller website warns visitors of the harsh consequences of drug violations in Indonesia. Even small amounts of narcotics, like marijuana, can result in severe penalties or incarceration. Regardless of medical prescriptions, the possession and consumption of cannabis-based goods are illegal in Indonesia. Arrests, imprisonment, fines, deportation, and even the death sentence can follow from such activities. The Indonesian authorities relentlessly pursue illegal drug trafficking, particularly in famous tourist areas. Travelers should also consult a doctor or the Indonesian embassy before bringing prescription pharmaceuticals into the country, especially sleeping pills. Many psychiatric drugs and pain relievers are illegal and may be seized upon arrival. When traveling with prescription pharmaceuticals, it is critical to have a valid prescription that covers the amount of medication. As international travel continues gradually in the aftermath of the COVID-19 epidemic, visitors are encouraged to get acquainted with the legal restrictions and potential consequences of their destination nations, particularly when it comes to sensitive issues such as drug-related charges. Number 3. Murtaza Correris. Human rights organizations following the case of Murtaza Correris, an 18-year-old Saudi teenager, say that he has been jailed without charge for more than 4 years and is facing death for alleged activities done when he was as young as 10. This potential has sparked widespread concern, with human rights organizations calling it one of the most serious abuses of children's legal rights anywhere in the world. Murtaza Correris was arrested when he was just 13 years old, and he has been detained ever since. The allegations against him, some of which date back 3 years before his detention, derive from his participation in anti-government rallies. These charges include possession of a firearm and membership in a terrorist group. This case shows the Saudi regime's attitude to inflicting capital punishment on a juvenile child and raises concerns about the Saudi regime's disdain for international legal norms. Maya Foa, the head of Reprieve, one of the human rights organizations engaged, stressed the gravity of the potential death of a teenager as a violation of international law. She denounced Saudi Arabia's pursuit of the capital penalty for Murtaza Correris, emphasizing the message it sends to the rest of the world about Saudi Arabia's perceived impunity. The European Saudi Organization for Human Rights, which has been closely following the case, has reported that the Saudi Public Prosecutor's Office accused Murtaza of participating in demonstrations on August 2 and 18. The same group stated that Murtaza had been imprisoned for years without being formally accused, during which time he was confined in solitary confinement without access to legal counsel. He is thought to have been pressured into confessing. Amnesty International also confirmed that when Murtaza's trial began in August 2018, the public prosecutor's office sought a capital sentence for him. While Saudi Arabia is infamous for its regular executions, although the Saudi embassy in Washington has not yet responded to the case, the Saudi monarchy has continuously maintained its frequent use of capital punishment. When questioned about executions by the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights in 2011, the Saudi government said that the capital sentence is only used for the most serious offenses and is subject to tight safeguards after due process. Nonetheless, human rights organizations believe that minor violations, as well as acts by minority groups and anti-government activists, frequently result in a capital sentence being pursued. Number 4. Conrad Schaefer. In a terrible and disastrous occurrence that shocked the community of Kissimmee, Florida, a 15-year-old boy called Conrad Schaefer went on a shooting spree that took the lives of innocent people and caused enormous damage. Schaefer, followed by his buddy David Damas, launched a sequence of gunfire that resulted in the unfortunate deaths of 2 persons, motivated by an unexplained feeling of satisfaction. The severity of their deeds, motivated by a perverse agenda, destroyed the town and left it in mourning. The first victim, 17-year-old David Guerrero, was mercilessly shot while waiting for a bus, demonstrating the sickening savagery of these teenagers. The heinous crime sent shockwaves through the community, leaving a profound sense of pain and loss in its aftermath. Authorities were able to track the pistol used in these horrible actions back to its origins, thanks to extensive investigations. Conrad Schaefer's father, Lothar Schaefer, had given his son a .35 caliber pistol just 1 day before the deadly spree began. As a result, Lothar Schaefer faced criminal accusations not only for aiding his son's access to the firearm, but also for facilitating his son's possession of a considerable amount of ammunition. The neighborhood is still reeling from the devastating effects of their actions. Legal actions were initiated, and those responsible for the horrible shootings were brought to justice. Conrad Schaefer entered a guilty plea to 2 charges of first-degree murder. Despite considering a 40-year jail sentence, the court finally condemned him to 2 consecutive life sentences, guaranteeing that he would spend the remainder of his life in prison. His attempts to convey sorrow and apologize to the victims' families were futile, since no words could possibly alleviate the enormous anguish he had inflicted on them. In the aftermath of the catastrophe, the victims' relatives struggled to cope with their grief and hatred. Some criticized Schaefer's apology, saying it lacked sincerity and substance. Dolores Horn, the aunt of one of the victims, expressed her desire for Schaefer to grasp her nephew's anguish genuinely. The community sought satisfaction in the knowledge that Schaefer's imprisonment would remove him from society, assuring the protection of others. Schaefer's mother testified during the trial that his childhood experience with leukemia had led to his harsh personality and intensified his rage. This revelation offered light on Schaefer's turbulent history, but it did not justify or excuse the terrible deeds he perpetrated. The father, Lothar Schaefer, faced the repercussions of his participation in delivering the pistol to his son in a separate legal action. He pled not guilty to a gun charge and was sentenced to 4 months in jail and 2 years on probation. Number 5. Jakayla Williams. Jakayla Williams, an 18-year-old teenager from Dothan, Alabama, is facing the death penalty after being charged with the murder of her newborn baby, whom she abandoned in a garbage bin immediately after giving birth. Williams is being detained without bail on a capital charge after her son's lifeless corpse was discovered inside a trash outside an apartment complex wrapped in a blanket by law police. She admitted to Dothan Police Department officers that she abandoned her kid owing to the exorbitant expense of child care, stating that she had given birth discreetly at her house. When her family found out about her pregnancy, she falsely stated that she had given birth at the Southeast Health Medical Center. Williams' family escorted her to the healthcare center to retrieve the kid, where she informed them that she had delivered the baby to an employee. Surveillance footage, however, contradicted her statement, causing the center's staff to call the authorities. Following that, the cops discovered the deceased infant among a stack of garbage. The exact reason for the infant's death is unknown, and an autopsy has been scheduled to shed light on the situation. During a news conference, Dothan Police Chief Will Benny voiced his disbelief, saying the occurrence was deeply disturbing and unprecedented in his entire law enforcement experience. He stressed the event's severe character and the impact it had on both the intellect and the soul. Chief Benny remarked that if Jakayla had gone to a hospital, the personnel would have admitted the newborn under Alabama's no questions asked policy, perhaps preventing the sad outcome. As of now, many experts say that Jakayla Williams will be given a capital sentence if she is found guilty of the crime. Local prosecutors are deliberating on the best course of action and the degree of penalty to pursue. Houston County District Attorney Russ Goodman said that such decisions would be made in due course. However, the background of Alabama's sentencing policies raises worries about Jakayla's possible destiny. According to the Equal Justice Initiative, the state has the dubious distinction of condemning more people to death per capita than any other state in the United States. Number 6. Alec McKinney. On May 7, 2019, suburban Colorado High School was rocked by a horrific shooting that left a lasting impression. The day's events centered around a catastrophic shooting carried out by 18-year-old Devin Erickson and his 16-year-old accomplice, Alec McKinney, which resulted in the demise of 18-year-old Kendrick Castillo and the injury of 8 others. Erickson and McKinney had painstakingly planned their assault over several weeks, spurred on by passionate testimonies from survivors of previous atrocities. Judge Teresa Michelle Slade sentenced Erickson to life in prison without the possibility of parole in reaction to the heinous acts. During the sentencing, Judge Slade stated that no words could completely change the circumstances. Prosecutors said that the attackers chose a dimly lit classroom where pupils were absorbed in a movie to create maximum havoc. It was speculated that McKinney was meant to die either by his own hand or by Erickson's. Castillo, along with fellow classmates Joshua Jones and Brendan Biley, confronted Erickson as his rifle malfunctioned, ultimately putting an end to the carnage. A security officer apprehended McKinney. During the court, Devin's father, Jim Erickson, apologized to the community, reading out the names of the victims and expressing regret for the enormous physical and mental wounds inflicted on them. Devin Erickson, on the other hand, stayed mainly mute throughout the trial, refusing to explain or justify his conduct. While others argued that the responsibility should be shared with students who had allegedly tormented the shooters, Erickson was found guilty of first-degree and 45 other offenses related to the incident. In the aftermath, McKinney, as a juvenile, received a life sentence with the potential of release after 20 years, while Erickson's sole emotional reaction came when his family stated that they loved him. The debate over whether bullying was a part of the shooting raged on, despite the fact that the basic significance of preserving the rule of law was underlined throughout. The sad events of that day continue to serve as a grim reminder of the intricacies that accompany such tragedies. The court system attempted to bring justice for the victims, with Erickson and McKinney facing the consequences of their conduct, while wider social concerns such as violence, bullying, and mental health prompted introspection and conversation. Number 7. Aiden Fucci. Aiden Fucci, who was 16 years old, was sentenced to life in prison for savagely stabbing his 13-year-old schoolmate and cheerleader Tristan Bailey 114 times out of his sick desire to feel what it was like to take someone's life. Fucci, who was 14 at the time of the heinous occurrence, pled guilty, admitting responsibility for the stabbing in St. John's, Florida's tranquil Durban crossing area in 2021. The sentencing hearing, presided over by Circuit Judge R. Lee Smith, was an emotional one, with Bailey's relatives in tears in the courtroom. Judge Smith underscored the horrific crime and the anguish she endured while attempting to defend herself throughout the attack. He determined that Fucci's acts revealed a high degree of planning and a frightening knowledge of the repercussions. Taking into account Fucci's age, mental health, home environment, and familial correspondence, the judge concluded that Fucci was the lone participant in the crime and was solely liable for the murder. He voiced doubt about the possibility of rehabilitation while acknowledging the victim's family's poignant words earlier in the week. In his 16 years of legal practice, Judge Smith said that this was one of the most challenging and upsetting cases he had ever seen. He found Fucci's motive for the crime unsettling, claiming that it looked to arise from an inherent urge to take people's lives. The court emphasized that there was no obvious reason for the crime other than to gratify this disturbing need. Fucci was a minor at the time of the crime, so he was sentenced to life in prison until he passed away there. However, Fucci expressed his regret in a handwritten letter throughout the hearings, apologizing to the Bailey family, his own family, and the community for his acts. The guilt, however, does little to lessen the grief and suffering inflicted by his heinous deed. The victim's family sought justice for their daughter, pleading with the judge to condemn Fucci to life in prison. During her evidence, Bailey's sister placed 114 stones in a jar, one for each stab wound Fucci inflicted on Tristan Bailey. The sentence serves as a stark reminder of the grave repercussions of such violent crimes, as well as raising issues about the difficulties of youth criminal justice and rehabilitation. Number 8. James Fairweather. James Fairweather's name became linked with horrible acts that shook his neighborhood and echoed throughout the country. Fairweather was born on May 17, 1998, in Colchester, Essex, and his childhood gave little clue of the nightmare route he would later take. Growing up in a middle-class family, there were no obvious symptoms of adversity or violent inclinations. However, as he approached adolescence, a troubling transition occurred. Fairweather's mental state deteriorated, exhibiting a disturbing obsession with violence and sacrifice. Following his social seclusion, his behavior became increasingly unpredictable, profoundly disturbing both those around him and his own family. The year 2014 represented a watershed moment in Fairweather's already turbulent existence. He began a horrible spate of atrocities at the age of 15, which would eternally tarnish his name and devastate Colchester. His victims, James Atfield and Nahid Almanea, were brutally assaulted and stabbed in separate events, leaving the community in shock and dread. Fairweather's acts were not rash. They were painstakingly planned and directed against vulnerable persons in remote regions, emphasizing the deliberate nature of his nasty aims. His tactics included stalking, dominating, and cruelly terminating the lives of his victims. The savagery and senselessness of his actions echoed not just in the United Kingdom, but also in Saudi Arabia, triggering a global manhunt. James Fairweather's trial revealed the entire depth of his troubling conduct when he was captured following a lengthy investigation. The courtroom learned of his troubling infatuation with serial killers, his unsettling fixation on the notion of sacrifice, and his desire to replicate the awful deeds of people he liked. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and there was no question about his guilt. Fairweather was given a life term in jail in 2016 for his heinous actions. Recognizing the gravity of his actions and the incalculable sorrow caused to the victims' families, this punishment sought not just to make him accountable for his conduct, but also to guarantee that he did not do additional harm to society. Fairweather's incarceration serves as a grim reminder of the immense destruction that violent acts may inflict on individuals and communities all around the world. Number 9. Willard Miller. 17-year-old teen Willard Miller from Iowa faced a life-changing fate as he stood before the court, sentenced to spend the rest of his days in prison. His vindictive acts had resulted in the savage demise of his high school Spanish teacher, Nohema Graber, a terrible tragedy that stunned the calm town of Fairfield. The events in the little Iowa town were a horrifying combination of circumstances. Miller and his accomplice, 18-year-old Jeremy Goodale, opted to act on their worst inclinations on a chilly November day, 2021. These two young men, who should have been preparing for their futures, instead chose a path of violence that would permanently change their lives and the lives of others. The motivation for their horrible deed might be traced back to academia. Miller had been harboring a profound animosity for Nohema Graber's grade. The resentment he felt over this seemingly small academic setback festered, eventually morphing into a malicious force that drove him to do an inconceivable act of violence. The teacher's normal afternoon walk through Chautauqua Park became her ultimate trek on that terrible day. The adolescents took advantage of the situation, ambushing her as she wandered through the peaceful surroundings. They carried her into the woods, where the ferocity of their baseball bat assault unfolded in a warped representation of their wrath. The weapon that should have represented relaxation and sport became a lethal weapon. The consequences of this heinous act shocked the whole town. Graber's lifeless body was discovered in a public park, disguised behind a tarp, wheelbarrow, and railroad ties. Witnesses saw her vehicle leave the location with two young males in the front seat, raising questions about the culprits. The truck was finally discovered abandoned at the end of a remote country road, adding to the mystery surrounding the ongoing inquiry. The court actions that followed revealed the gruesome facts of the attack. Although their versions differed, Miller and Goodale were accused of hitting Graber with the lethal bat. The complexities of their guilt began to emerge when Goodale, realizing the consequences of his acts, chose to testify against Miller. He revealed that Miller had originated the terrifying plan to end Graber's life, something Miller had previously denied. The reality of their acts emerged, irreversibly tying their destiny. The court sought to cope with the horror of the crime and the possibility of rehabilitation as the trial advanced. Judge Sean Showers accepted Miller's youth, but highlighted that his malicious purpose and acts had permanently ended Nohema Graber's life. Miller and Goodale were both sentenced to life in prison. Miller addressed the court after a heartfelt moment of contemplation. He apologized for his horrific actions, admitting the agony and misery he had caused Graber's family in a voice laden with regret. His comments, no matter how earnest they were, could never restore the terrible damage he had perpetrated on an innocent life. Number 10. Iranian teenagers. Two Iranian teens are presently facing capital punishment after being condemned to death by hanging for their suspected involvement in the continuing demonstrations that have shaken the republic for several months. A renowned human rights organization revealed this concerning development. The protests, spurred by the terrible murder of Mahsa Amini, have stirred widespread indignation in Iran and throughout the world, raising worries among human rights activists that this might be the start of a wave of executions. Iran appears to be using the fear of capital punishment as a kind of intimidation in an attempt to put an end to the continuing protests. In this context, the situation of Mehdi Mohammedifard, an 18-year-old demonstrator, strikes out as particularly upsetting. He was sentenced to death for his suspected involvement in the arson of a traffic police kiosk in Noshar, a town in Mazandaran province. The death sentence was handed down by a revolutionary court in Sari, the province capital, according to the Iran Human Rights Organization located in Oslo, Norway. the court found him guilty of corruption on earth and enmity against God. What makes his case even more unique is that he received 2 death sentences as a result of the dual nature of his convictions. The director of IHR, Mahmoud Amiri Moghaddam, spoke with AFP about the situation. He emphasized the dismal importance of this event, stating that Mehdi Mohammadi looks to be the youngest person sentenced to death in connection with the ongoing protests, based on available evidence. These youngsters' tragedy highlights the harshness of Iran's response to criticism and its use of capital punishment as a means of control. Another protester, Mohammad Boroghani, is also facing the potential of death. In December, the Supreme Court affirmed his death sentence on grounds of enmity against God. He is accused of a variety of offenses, including stabbing a security guard with a knife with the purpose of taking his life and setting fire to a government office in Pakhdasht, approximately 27 miles southeast of Tehran. Boroghani, who is reported to be 19 years old, has also become a symbol of the terrible penalties that protesters endure. The Mizan online news website associated with Iran's judiciary recently reported that at least 100 protesters are at risk of execution, either due to being sentenced to death or charged with capital crimes. These developments have drawn significant international condemnation, prompting human rights organizations to call for heightened pressure on Iran to halt further executions. It's important to note that the judiciary has declared a total of 11 death sentences in connection with the ongoing protests. While Iranian officials have labeled the protests as riots, the global community continues to express its concern over the treatment of these protesters and the seemingly disproportionate response from the government.